Fueled by Death Guest.
Is that a GoPro?
Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah.
It's a good one.
It's perfect for.
You can throw it in the water and shit.
Yeah.
Oh, you can go into water with it. That's dope.
Oh,
Yeah.
by the way, you can swear. Don't worry about it.
Oh yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
cool.
We are Deathwish Coffee. We're
I always
That's
forget
true.
to tell people that, and then they end up swearing in the interview, and they're like, shit. Oh, wait, can I swear?
Can I swear? It's kind of cute when people ask.
the thing about it.
WTF? There's always somebody like, oh, can I swear? It's like, you clearly haven't listened to this podcast ever.
Exactly. And it's not even that. It's like, swearing, the stigma is there. Your mother told you not to do it when you were a kid, but we all are adults. We all use blue language in normal talk. And when we started this show, we had very few rules when we started, but one of them was, I always want it to be explicit because I don't want to be in the middle of a conversation and have someone have to edit themselves while they're talking.
It's kind of like asking Art Spiegelman to not smoke for 5 minutes.
Exactly.
5 minutes. That's all I ask, and he still can't do it. He insists, one of his writers, I'm half joking, he has a writer like Green M&M's.
Right.
But one of the things it seems, is like he has to be allowed to smoke because that's just part of his process of talking. Wow. And by the way, if we're gonna probably hear some Brooklyn, New York sounds.
I mean, it's authentic, right?
That's right. Keeping it real.
It's super authentic because we're here with you in your home, which is I can't believe. Thank you so much for inviting us.
Thank you guys for coming.
Yeah. And I mean, let's talk. Let's start with Brooklyn. Let's talk about what you're doing right now. This incredible Red Hook story.
So, show to the folks
at
home. I had come up with this character in 2012 called the Red Hook. In fact, his original name was the Rascal because I just loved calling something a rascal.
I like it, right? Yeah,
it's a good word.
And then in the first story I wrote, his first, he's a super thief in Brooklyn, New York, in Red Hook, but the first story I wrote, what he steals is another character's name, the Red Hook.
The Red Hook.
So there was another Red Hook, and he winds up dying with his paramour, this girlfriend. And he figures, well, they're dead. It's a good name. I'm going to take it, And because he's been denying this thing that he had killed someone with his right fist in a boxing match. And so that's a right hook, and it was a bloody mess. So it was like the Red Hook. So that's where that partially comes from, as corny as that is.
And you actually include that in
the back,
the actual iteration of this.
That's right. So what this book comprises is 3 stories. The first story that is kind of a pre-New Brooklyn story during the New Brooklyn phase, the one I live in and that you are visiting right now. Yes. That was published in Dark Horse Presents in 3 issues of that. That's an anthology series I've been wanting to be in for eons.
Yeah.
Ever since Frank Miller pitched to Bob Schreck, he wanted to do a character that was a Conan in a trench coat. Do you know what that was? Do you know what Conan?
Which would have turned into
Sin City.
Sin City,
Marv.
right?
Sin City.
Because he's as big as Conan.
That's right. In a trench coat.
In a trench coat.
Yeah. So, and actually, I hung out with Frank for about 5 minutes last weekend at Denver Comic-Con.
Awesome.
That's
talked to him about movies and stuff. So he was really cool. So anyway, I've always wanted to be in that anthology, Dark Horse Presents, which right now it's defunct once again. I think it has its own phases.
Yeah.
And but that's what the first story is, about 24 pages of that. Then we take a quick little chapter break, and then we hop into the New Brooklyn part of the story, and then the book ends with a little kind of it ends with the 2-pager of the Purple Heart, was a character I co-created with Vito Del Sante and artist Ricardo Venancio. And the reason why I co-created that character is I present some cool ideas in the Red Hook, which we'll talk about in a second.
Yeah.
But then it becomes a story about Sam Ambrosia, the Red Hook,
and
what happens to him.
Yeah.
Okay, so it becomes more of a personal story about him versus and so the background of Brooklyn becoming New Brooklyn,
right,
which we'll get to in a second, is pushed into the background. But I wanted to have another character talk more about what happened to New Brooklyn,
right.
And so the Purple Heart kind of does that a lot, which is also online at Line Webtoon, which you can read now for free.
That's awesome.
So it gives like a specific perspective.
Very specific because, okay, so here's the pitch for the Red Hook, which we'll put 2 and 2 together. So the Red Hook is bequeath the Omni Fist of Altruism.
Say that 3 times fast.
Against his will, or he will die. He's a super thief.
Yep.
And so he's suddenly made this superhero, where this character, the Green Point, is dying. You have to read the story to get all the information.
Right.
And the closest person to him is like one of his enemies.
Right.
And he's like, well, I have to pass on my altruism to somebody.
Yeah.
So he punches him in the chest, grabs his heart, and that is the Omni Fist right there. Cuts off his hand, repairs him, and he's like, basically, it's like if this guy walks past any danger or a crime being committed, his hand will start to squeeze his heart,
Right.
killing him. So this like makes him have to do good things. Kind of like he even says is to be good for goodness sake, almost like a Santa Claus superhero, you know? Like, and he's like, what the hell just happened to me? And this is during a time where Brooklyn reveals herself to be sentient, and she's heartbroken by the indifference and apathy of the world, and decides to physically and literally secede from New York City, ergo America, to start her own republic, where there's a pandemic of new heroes and villains that rise from this kind of cosmic, scorched earth thing that happens.
Yeah.
Also, and this is where I get to fantasize, and we can talk about Brooklyn, is where art can be traded and bartered for food and services.
Oh.
So it's a little hippy dippy in that way,
Yeah.
a little socialist maybe, somewhat. But I figure because of like the Jack Kirby comics I grew up on, or like the TV shows like Star Trek, where we suddenly had flip phones and we have cell phones that was on Star Trek, or the Mother Box or whatever from Jack Kirby comics. I figure you put stuff out there that might seem at first absurd and ridiculous, but then little by small they become real.
Yeah.
They're prescient. These comics are prescient. Art is prescient. You
Right.
know? And in my case, I write and draw comic books, and I love comic books, so that's where I've been noticing it. You put something out there, and little by small, it happens later.
Right.
Or
Yeah.
it occurs. And because I don't know how science and technology works necessarily, but maybe if you just seed the brain with something,
Yes.
So with that in mind, part of the reason why I was struggling with Brooklyn as an artist is because it's so damned expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I moved here to this apartment 21 years ago because I couldn't afford Manhattan,
Right.
where I was born and raised and grew up, right?
Yeah.
Now, not only can I not really afford Brooklyn, but Brooklyn's more expensive than Manhattan.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
When did that happen?
Yeah.
It's insane.
Well, I feel like a lot of parts of the city and many other cities go through this phase where it's broken down and it's poor. So then the artists get to move in and create, and then the artists create and make a cool place to be.
Make it a cool place to be.
Yeah, and then the money moves in because they're like, oh, this is a hip, cool place
That's
to be.
right.
And then all of a sudden it becomes, I don't know, is gentrified the word?
You know,
And then-
gentrification gets a bad rap. I understand why it's used as a negative, but I always have to remind people, it takes someone to sell first.
Yeah.
It's true.
Before
Yep.
people can buy
true.
and flip and turn and all that jazz, right?
Yeah.
So like, let's start with them first, and probably what happens is like, so a whole bunch of young artists or scallywags move into the neighborhood, and it's not like the tribe they're used to, these older folks who kind of have settled here and hung out.
Right.
In this case, Carroll Gardens was actually was a part of Red Hook.
Yeah.
But then they sliced a part of it out to make it seem like it was nicer. Call it Carroll Gardens. They put little gardens in front of, not over here, but in other streets. You
Yeah.
walk around, you'll see that. I mean, listen, Red Hook has a really brutal history. It was where Al Capone started as a gangster, but it was so rough, he had to go to Chicago to be Al Capone.
Crazy.
Oh,
That's just where he
crazy.
got his scars from, was I think in Red Hook, Brooklyn. It's also the place that apparently Steve Rogers was born and
Yes,
raised,
yes.
and then became Captain America.
Yeah.
Of course.
Plus a lot of other things. Like
Yeah.
I feel like even though On the Waterfront with Marlon Brando,
Yep.
I think that's actually based in Hoboken or in parts of New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
But whenever I go to the waterfront here, all I see is Brando,
Of
the ghost of
course.
Brando walking around.
Yeah,
Of
course.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway,
I wanted to ask, and this is kind of more of a generalization on you, but with this story and the overarching stories that tie into it with New Brooklyn and the
Yeah.
Red Hook, and a lot of your work, and I'll throw it back to Beef with Tomato,
Sure.
and even Billy Dogma and those types of things, you have this inherent love for where you're from, for New York City, and now with Brooklyn. And the question I want to ask you is like, so many people, sure, they love where they're born,
Right.
but when they become of age, of an adult type age, the first thought is usually to flee the nest and to leave, and you've held on to it and celebrate it with what you create. Is there a reason for that?
I think it's a few reasons. One is, and I'll start off with this. Whenever I meet someone, it's like, and I remember the first time I ever came to New York City. I will never experience that.
Right.
Because I'm from
that's so
here.
weird.
Yeah.
Born in New York Hospital. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You know, like, what is that like? I don't
Yeah.
know. And I don't know what that means. You know, actually, no, I do know what it means because when I've gone to other cities or other places
Right.
that feel new, brand new to me,
Right.
maybe that's the same type of feeling.
But
right?
even
Of course.
still, other cities aren't as big as what New York City is.
Well, I've
It
been to
isn't the
Paris.
monster that
No, it isn't the monster. But I've been to Paris.
Yeah, yeah,
I actually
okay.
really like fell in love with New Orleans.
Yeah.
And I had no idea I would. You know, when I got
Right.
there, I was like, whoa, wait a second. This is kind of an amazing space.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't mean like the touristy part, but my friends who live there, they took me to the side stuff.
Yeah.
Like when I bring people around when they come to New York.
Right.
You know, the other thing is you know, I was always more of a Marvel Comics fan than DC Comics fan. DC kind of made up their cities or were versions of Metropolis, Gotham,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
But Spider-Man was in Queens.
Yes.
You know, Doctor Strange is on Bleecker Street.
Yes.
You know, the Fantastic Four was in Midtown. You know, like it was real places to the point where I would try to find these places.
Yes.
You know, so it felt more real. And with that in mind, it meant that the city is a character too.
Yeah.
So I've always like recognized where I live is a character, has characterizations. Someone said to me, how do you write a story in New York? I said, I just have to write it. It's a New York story.
Right.
If it takes place here, that is a New York story.
Right.
Like, is there something that makes it New York? Maybe. Like, you know, for a long time, there was a certain accent that a cab driver had that was, if you saw a movie, that was New York. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Now it's very different because of who's driving cabs, right?
Right.
So, and that's cool. And that's the melting pot of, that's the other thing. Like, New York City is a melting pot. I'm spoiled. It's everything.
Yeah.
And it's not just like an okay version, average version of everything. It's the best versions of everything. Sure, I should go to India if I love Indian food and Indian culture, of course. But we have a pretty good taste of it here, you know?
Yeah.
And you can say that about all ethnicities, you know? And I'm just one of many, you know? And that's how I've always seen New York City to be, is this like cacophony, you know, like it's a bad analogy, but like a Benetton ad, you know, like where you have everything and everybody, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I mean, diversity is New York City.
Yeah,
you know?
that's true.
It's kind of cool how you, and it's so true. Cities have their own personality, have their own life.
Yep.
And now what you have done in your comics, you've actually given a city life. Is that where you got that idea?
Well, I mean, forgive the pun, but I needed a hook for the red hook. It wasn't just enough that it was like, well, yeah, Mike. I mean, my challenge originally was, and I think I don't know if when I met you, if it was the first, second, or third time I went to Yaddo. It might have been the third time I went to Yaddo.
I think so. You were working on this, I think.
So when I went to Yaddo the first time in 2012, I wanted a creative palette cleanser because I was going in for writing only, and I wanted to just challenge myself with you know, just writing prose or writing a screenplay or a play or something, right?
Yeah.
And that meant like shrugging off what I'm used to doing, which is making comics.
Yeah.
So the first night I was there, I was like, all right, let me just quickly do a comic thing and get out of my system, right? And then I would just face the man in the mirror and try to write other things. You know?
Right.
And that night I didn't really have a job or a gig at the time, so I was like, well, what if, and I had a what if in my brain, which is what if Jack Kirby and Alex Toth got together and created a character?
Right. Which would be crazy.
Which would be fun and crazy.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
And I thought it would have some kind of cosmic kind of fallout, the character, and I wasn't sure exactly what that was, which later on turned out to be the Omniface of Altruism with a sword that he can pull out of his chest and all this fun stuff. But I thought it would be a hero, but maybe be like an anti-hero, but not just an anti-hero. He's actually a thief, but he's not evil. You know, he's just a little selfish.
Yeah.
Or he's in a situation where he has to steal, you know? And so I kind of like wrote that first little story that's in the back of this. And then that was it. I just wrote it, and I was like, that's what this character is for right now.
Right.
Then when I did another residency half a year later at the Atlantic Center for the Arts, I actually drew the damn thing, you know? So, and then I had this in my back pocket, and in fact, it was my audition to get to write and draw the Fox for Archie Comics.
Right.
Which I did 10 issues of, you know,
Yes.
two story arcs. In fact, the first story arc was published. It was called Freak Magnet. That came out a couple years ago. And the next one, Fox Hunt, is coming out at the end of August. Which
Excellent.
Cool.
Thank God.
Excellent.
Coming
I'm
out.
so excited.
So anyway, I mean, I've always been a fan of Silver Age comics, Golden Age comics. I grew up in the Bronze Age. Is that 70s and 80s or
I think
whatever?
so.
You know?
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of where I peaked when it comes to superheroes. Now, of course, our comics have gotten a lot cooler and more sophisticated, as has our television and movies. You know?
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, I've said this before, and so have other people. But one could hazard that television has become our modern literature. Some of it.
I think
you
some
know,
of it, yeah.
because of how complex it is, and it's not just one episode. You're watching a season now.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, that tells one story, and then
Yeah.
it's seeding the next season, and it's bananas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How complicated this stuff gets. But I still love that older kind of comic and that older kind of single episode, single camera TV
Yeah.
show. That's a sensibility that I mean that's how that's the original text for me.
Yeah.
The source material,
Yeah.
what I'm responding to. So I'm doing my version or a modern version of the stuff I grew up reading.
It's totally relevant for fans who would read, your Red Hook, especially the newer stuff with the Red Hook.
Right.
Because it's peppered with exactly what you're talking about, the stuff that you love. There's Frank Miller in there.
Oh, my
There's
God.
Ditko in there, and there's a lot of Jack Kirby in there.
Yep. Will Eisner, I'd hazard.
Will
'cause of
Eisner,
the city being
of
a character,
course,
and
of course. And I wanted to ask you this question actually because a lot of people cite Kirby as their gateway into comics, especially from that era, the 70s.
He wasn't my gateway to comics.
Really?
I think it's funny. I'll talk to a lot of artists, and I think as kids we were all afraid of Kirby or didn't understand Kirby because I just turned 51, so I started reading comics, 70s, let's say, early to mid 70s, and that was like when Jack had left DC, came back to Marvel,
right.
And what was he working on? Devil Dinosaur, Captain America, Machine Man, and maybe one or two other things. But that was also as he was aging out, kind of, and I think they were just letting him do some comics because I think that was also the time when he was also his own editor, basically.
That's true.
And this is before he went and did Captain Victory, at Pacific Comics in the 80s. So he was kind of aging out. And so I think as a kid, I was looking at stuff, and it was kind of like Cubism on crack, like,
it's
what is this stuff,
it's mind-blowing.
I mean, I
stuff.
love it now.
But when
as
you
a
look at it as a kid,
So my Jack Kirby was John Byrne.
Okay.
George Perez.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Ron Wilson, who I also just said hi to at
awesome.
Denver County on Marvel 2-in-1. Those were the artists that I was following, a lot as a kid, those X-Men, those Teen Titans, Fantastic Four, of course. And then I was, I had this amazing moment where one of the first comics I ever read was a comic called Star Wars, and it was about this movie that was going to be coming out soon. And it was drawn by Howard Chaykin.
Yes.
And I want to say, how many years later? So, like 9 years later, I would be his assistant on American Flag.
Great.
Oh, that's crazy.
Every
It's weird
day.
how
My
those things work
senior
out.
year, my senior year of high school, I had gone to music and art in basically in Harlem. My first 3 years, and my senior year, music and art got married to performing arts and became LaGuardia High School. And so that went to Midtown. It went from Harlem down to Midtown, Lincoln Center, actually, right next to Martin Luther King. And I had befriended Larry O'Neill.
Yep.
And Larry is the son of Denny O'Neill. And so he was also a comics fan, and we loved horror movies, and we just became best friends for a while. And he had gotten wind from his dad that Howard was looking for an assistant, and then down the hall, Bill Sienkiewicz was looking for an assistant. So I actually first became Bill Sienkiewicz's assistant.
And this is you breaking into
This is
comics.
1985. I'm 17 going on 18. Instead of doing my homework, I was running downtown to the studio, Upstart Studios. So then I'm sitting in a room with Bill Sienkiewicz working on New Mutants and Electro Assassin.
Oh,
Yep.
cool.
Right?
Yeah.
Next to me is Michael Davis, who would go on to co-create Milestone, I believe, and some
I think
characters.
So. Yeah.
And then Dennis Cowan.
Oh my gosh.
Working on, what was it? He was working on, I think, V, the miniseries, and Vigilante and stuff like that. And then down the hall was Upstart, and that was Chaykin, Simonson, who's working on Thor.
Thor, yeah.
And Jim Sherman. And previous to that, other people who had shared that studio was Jim Starlin and Frank Miller and others.
Gosh.
Which is
Wow,
crazy,
just all the heavy
right?
hitters,
So,
yeah.
okay,
all that
I-
energy, man,
Yeah.
I gotta ask then, as a 17-year-old kid, you're obviously a lover of comics, but
Yes.
does it
It's Holy
resonate
Grail.
with
It's
you
Holy
at that?
Grail.
Like you're in that
Absolutely.
moment, right?
Oh,
You're
no,
like,
no,
That
no.
must have been so cool for you.
Totally aware, afraid.
Afraid.
That's the
That's what
best.
I was getting at.
That's
is
the
like,
best.
Totally afraid. But that energy, that fear. Like I would never say I'm like Marvin Gaye, but apparently Marvin Gaye was terrified to sing in front of people.
I've heard that.
And
actually.
with that kind of terror, look at what he created.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So yes, of course I was afraid, but then like the minute you're dissing each other,
Right.
you're in.
Yeah.
You're making fun of each other. You're
Yeah.
in, and you're relaxed, and you're working on stuff, and you're making things. I mean, I've never been ready for prime time. I feel I've been too indie for the mainstream and too mainstream for the indie. In a way. So I've been hopscotching, and I'm in this little space. Where I dodge things.
Yeah.
So it's always been a weird career for me in that way. And also because of the type of things that I do. Like I've worked on memoir, like you brought up Beef with Tomato or Billy Dogma.
Yeah.
Billy Dogma was a character that I created in 1995 that's basically the last romantic antihero, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it just occurred to me recently, working on Red Hook, because I haven't done a lot of Billy Dogma lately, that I'm kind of revisiting Billy with spandex.
There is a
little.
I noticed that when I was reading Red Hook, there is a little. You turned down that road a couple times.
I went down the Billy Dogma road.
Yeah.
In fact, when you read War Cry, you'll see there's a lot more of that. And then my current story that I'm going to be hopefully done with the first draft of the script for the third story to make the trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
It's so Billy Dogma, it's absurd. It's I might as well just call it Billy Dogma, But I love where it's going. And obviously, as an author, you start to do, or an auteur, you start to realize your own trends.
Mm-hmm.
You keep revisiting the things that bother you, or the things that you want to impart, out into the world or communicate, with your art. Yeah. And I love and loyalty is really important to me. It seems, So I write about those things all the time. In my works, and I think it's something. It's an itch that you keep scratching, And I think that's another way that people can relate. You can put like villains and heroes and conflicts and the end of the world or if someone's, doing something, whatever it is, the root of it is love. The root of it is a romance comic at the end of the day.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm making, a romance comics with these other trappings, these other genre trappings on top of it.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of trends, you tended to have a lot of this like hopeless romantic anti-hero theme repeating out through some of your characters.
Yes.
Where did this come from? Where are you inspired by this thought, by this type of character?
Well, I mean, because you just threw that in my head, and the first thing that pops, and sometimes that's what you have to respond to, is Frankenstein.
Huh?
I
think
love it.
Frankenstein's
I love
monster.
Of course.
I also think my favorite character in the Marvel Universe is Ben Grimm, the Thing.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Like a really good guy who like finally finds love with a blind woman.
Right.
The irony of because she doesn't care about the
Right.
monstrosity in front of her, and in fact she probably touches him more than a person that can see because that's how she sees. So the love is even stronger.
Yeah.
If you think about it.
Yeah.
So do I identify with a monster? Not really, but I've always loved misunderstood monsters.
Yeah.
And so maybe there's other I could probably cite other characters or movies or books, but there's something about the misunderstood monster that I've always been attracted to.
Yeah.
And listen, we're living in a time right now where I can't believe we have to teach empathy. Okay? But whenever I see I'm not a classist either. I feel like we're all the same.
Yeah.
Although often there's evidence that we're not.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
But having said that, I always have empathy for persons down and out or misunderstood, or like Boo Radley from To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah.
Those characters who on the surface look like a ghoul or look like, you don't want to know that person. But do you ever talk to these people? Often there's gold in these people's, stories and narratives and hearts. And they've had to build up a shield because they're either ugly or they don't act right or whatever it is. And I feel in a way as a cartoonist early on, comics became cool at some point. I don't know how that happened.
I don't either. I'm so happy
Because
it did, but I have no idea how it happened.
Became cool, maybe because of Hollywood and cinematic universes and whatnot.
That's definitely a huge part of it.
That definitely helps.
Yeah.
And also because I think the people who were rising up the ranks in the companies that were comic book fans.
Yeah,
and
that's
got the
also
seat,
that.
right?
Right.
And they could then green light the projects and do it right.
It's kind of like why we're seeing marijuana legalized now, because all the
Totally.
people going into office now have smoked weed and realized that,
That's right.
hey, I like it.
I like
You know?
it, and it doesn't hurt nobody.
Yeah.
Neither do comics.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
But I do remember feeling rejected for loving comics. Like
Me too.
First of all, I liked comics, and I had to come to love it as a defense because I was told, yeah, that's for children, or you're stupid, or and I remember like being in the train in the subway, and like I'm reading a comic, and this girl just came up to me and just made fun of it for me. I was like, what the hell? I wasn't even talking to you. I'm doing my thing.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, I have to. Now I love comics.
Yeah.
You know, because you're not going to tell me what to do. And then eventually everybody fell in love with comics, and that was a weird turning point, you know?
Yeah.
Like I used to be embarrassed a little. My very first interview I did was on cable TV in New York eons ago. And I was being interviewed about, doing something early on.
Yeah.
And my dad watched it, and I said, well, what do you think about it? What do you think? And he's like, well, you're really good except for one thing. I was like, what? He's like, you keep apologizing for what you love. And I guess the way I would describe it is like, well, I know people don't like this, or I know you probably don't do this, or whatever. I would always, have a caveat to explaining what I did and liked. And he was like, remove that part. Just own it.
Yeah.
And I was
That's
like,
good
you know what?
advice,
You're right.
man.
You're right. So, and early on, I just became an advocate for this form, to the point where I devoted my life to it.
Yeah.
Of course, I do like doing other things like writing prose or doing plays, which I've done recently. Developing TV shows and stuff. So what I realized at the end of the day, what I love is storytelling. Okay, but you cannot deny the power and the unlimited budget of a blank page that you can fill with whatever you want.
That's true.
I don't need a crew. I don't need craft services. I just need my imagination and my will and testament and commitment to fill that page and do it again and again and keep showing up. Not only to my stories, but to my own party. That's another thing I tell people is like, when people ask me now today, like, how would you do how do you get into comics now, right?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, you don't ever have to be published by Marvel and DC to be a
Ever.
professional in comics, which is interesting time, it just means that it's expensive.
That used to not be the case.
I know.
It'd be like
You'd
you
be
had
trying to
yeah.
get my dream as a kid was to pencil the Fantastic Four one day, and I would have been set,
Yeah.
I did bank on that eventually, which was really cool.
That 4-part thing series.
Yeah, I know.
That's-
Well, then recently, before the book ended, I had some pages in there as well. So anyway, and it's coming back, thank God.
Awesome.
But what I tell people now is, you have the internet. If you're gonna post about your lunch,
right,
or complain about, why don't you take the same energy,
right,
and if you want to make something, create something, use and abuse the internet. You got all the social networking tools. You got Instagram. It's a visual, platform. The only thing I suggest is once you start, keep doing it.
yeah,
Because if you're asking other people to invest in you, you're adding like a calendar to their life. Like it may not have an alert letting them know that you. But if they come back to you and you're not there when you say you're gonna be there on a Wednesday or a Sunday or whatever, they're going to start to think that you're full of shit and you don't care either. And part of that contract between reader and author is for the author to show up no matter what, no matter how many clicks and likes you get, I think the internet's become somewhat of a popularity contest, which is a little unfortunate because it means that publishers are now asking, how many people are following you right now?
right.
Yeah.
That's the worst.
Because they don't want to do the job of marketing you. They're expecting you now to market yourself.
Yeah.
So you have to wear all these hats: creator, publisher, sometimes publicist. And after a while, when do you have time to make the work if you're always
Exactly.
promoting? So it becomes a harried situation. And or you get an agent or something like that. That do all the quote work, and that can be cool, I guess, if you're doing really well.
Yeah, but
But you can't afford that if you're just starting out.
right.
Or, or a guy like me living in Brooklyn, I need every dime I make,
Right.
just to get by,
Right.
And yeah, I could move to a basement somewhere in middle America, but I'm a New Yorker.
You
Yeah.
seem like you stand against that pretty heavy, though. Even with some of the stuff that you write, just like you mentioned something about like a lot of artists escaping New York City
Yes.
and moving like
Yes.
upstate in a
Yeah.
safer area, but you seem to have maybe a bit of disdain to that type of retreat.
I get it why people need to split because of, their wallets and bank accounts.
Yeah.
And I guess just the same idea of, sticking to your own production schedule. If you're a New Yorker or wherever, Chicago, California, wherever, you stuck your flag in the ground, unless it's beating the shit out of you, don't be abused by it, don't be in a bad relationship.
Right.
But figure it out, if you can, especially if you're using the city. That's another thing. I don't use the city like I should. This city, you're asking well, what makes a city? If I was in New Orleans, I probably have to drink every night, number one. Which is why I don't go to New Orleans. And that is a bad thing, but I can't recover like I used to.
Yeah, I know, right?
So we're all getting too old.
And I'd be like, I don't belong in New Orleans. I'm not drinking today. What's wrong with me? I'm a bad New Orleans. But these cities provide so much entertainment and different points of view. I think it's what keeps you young and keeps you thriving and creative is don't get stuck in your own familiar, reach out, go and do weird stuff, see what's happening, and big cities have a lot of weird stuff happening. I mean, I think small towns probably do too, but it might involve animals. I'm sorry, I'm being a jerk right now.
Wildlife and nature.
Yeah, we got a bunch of horses, all right?
I got horses.
I
have a couple of red-tailed hawks that move in my backyard.
yeah?
They're killing everything. It's very interesting. But yeah, routine is kind of like the enemy of creativity.
Absolutely.
Right? And being in a lively city like this, you can murder routine easily. And you can just become so creative. So is that where your disdain lies? Is that
Well, listen, I don't know if it's a disdain. I feel
maybe
like
that's not the right word because I'm not really picking up like an anger behind it, but
no, maybe I'm angry that we're being pushed out.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm angry that real estate developers come in and go, "Oh, I know what we'll do with your cool. We're going to do it this way, monetize your cool."
Right.
I'm like, well, we're trying to monetize our cool. We're trying to get by. In fact, don't look at us. We found a spot that's affordable enough, and it's a crappy area of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Don't come and make it nice. Because when you make it nice, I can't afford to make my work here anymore.
Right.
And we're putting our stuff out there. And then they develop it they put up a nice, they dress it up.
Yeah.
And then they have rich people come in, buy out the spaces, don't live there. So then it's empty anyway. And you're like, what is going on here?
Mm-hmm.
How is this a city? And then all the cool spots where you have salons or you go and there's funky music here or whatever, they get bought out, turned around, sold, and they become either a bank or some kind of, all-purpose pharmacy.
Right.
And after a while, is that what you want? Is that what New York City is supposed to be? So that's my anger there. So in a way, I'm angry that they're being shoved out.
Yeah.
Right. That it's not, and the exodus is more of a survivor thing, just so that they can make their art somewhere else, or else they would have gotten a job, some job that would let them stay here and not have to. I don't know. I just feel like there's so much cool stuff happening. You have to let experiment gestate.
Yeah.
The avant-garde has to have a laboratory. Okay.
It's true.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know. Sometimes I feel like, what is the city doing for me? I know I was doing a lot for the city, at least through my art and everything. But am I making the city? I don't know how I'm energizing the city, except maybe omnisciently through creativity.
Yeah.
And that's actually something I bring up in my third story.
Excellent.
And I don't want to give that away.
Yeah, don't give that away.
Again, putting those ideas out there.
Maybe
it'll come back to
you. We talk about that a lot on this show, actually. The same kind of tenement that if you say it into the universe, then it exists. Even by just vocalizing that idea now exists.
It has legs now.
It might never go farther than the words you just said out loud.
Right.
But it can now because it exists.
And that goes also for the bad ideas.
Of course. Of course it does.
So, but you're right. I like the idea of it has legs.
Yeah.
And hopefully if it's good, it will maybe come true.
Something.
In a version maybe you never even thought of.
Yeah.
Because by the time it gets there, maybe it was necessary then. You know? It's good to hope and dream. I mean, you have to.
It definitely is. And a lot of that obviously stems from creativity. And I kind of wanted to ask you on the side of a creative process, because it's always interesting to talk to someone who is both a writer and an artist. And I wanted to know, when you set out to, develop a story, and this is kind of a twofold question. Do you start with the idea, the script first, or do you start with the imagery first? And on that, do you start with the type of creativity that you're going to go for? Because, like you were saying, you have written a lot of prose. You've written plays. By the way, saw your third play,
That's right.
Last Bar at the End of the World, which was excellent. But even seeing that play, I'm watching these visuals being performed to me in front of me, and that could easily be something that I could have seen you draw.
Sure.
So how do you begin that creative process?
Well, because I'm in a weirdly autonomous space right now, because Line Webtoon basically hired me to write, draw, create, fully produce ideas I own. And they're just basically licensing it, for exclusivity on their app, you know, for a few years before I can take it anywhere else.
Right.
Which is why the Red Hook, this just came out like a couple weeks ago, but it's been online for about 2 years.
Right.
Right.
And then the sequel, War Cry, is out now and wrapped up, and that should be out hopefully fall of next year. And then the one I'm writing right now that I'll be start drawing in a couple of weeks will probably debut early next year, wrap up it, but then be the following year, like 2020.
Right.
So that's just the scheduling of stuff, right? But with that in mind, that means that these projects that take at least a year to produce, I have to really be into these ideas.
Oh, of course.
Sure, I can do little ditties, and like, if it's just a couple of pages, I don't have to be in love with it.
Right.
If it pays well, or I get to collaborate with somebody, or, this is a goofy thing, it's less of an investment. You know? But these are emotional investments, to put these out there, because in a way, I'm creating a testament of life through my work.
Yep.
I have a platform that I've been working really hard to have, to be able to exploit these ideas and put them out there, and hopefully be able to live off of them just enough to squeak by, So I guess when I'm coming up with a big idea, and something that, again, it's weird because when you produce something, you don't know when it finally comes out, if it's going to do well or snooze, or, I mean, there's a term I hate. I'm going off to the side for a second. You know the term meh? Like, meh?
Yeah.
I want to punch people. I want to punch people.
I know somebody who got it tattooed. It was like,
no.
Come on.
But I don't, because those people have never made anything.
Right.
Like the worst movie, the worst comic book, I hopefully you have some critical thought, that, into how you respond to it. But I could never say meh, because I'm like, well, it didn't work. It's not good.
Right.
But it, they tried to do something.
Yeah, well,
They created something.
you know what it took to make that.
Yeah, what it
you
takes
you
to
know
make
the
it.
emotional investment and the time investment. That
Nobody
it took
set out to
that.
make a piece of shit.
Yeah.
Right.
Right? Just like a villain doesn't think that the worst person on earth.
Right.
They
think
have
they're the hero.
ideas. They're just different, right?
Every villain believes they're the hero.
They're their own hero.
doing the right thing.
So to just basically like to invest in all this, I have to really be in love and really own this idea and be inside it. And then, of course, once I finish writing it, because everyone loves to get to the end of something, I got to go back to the beginning and draw it.
Right.
And then I got to find that energy again because I know where it goes, but I'm writing it in 5-page clips because that's how it's delivered online.
So you don't draw while you're writing.
I should. And when I did Fear My Dear, the Billy Dogma graphic novel, there were 2 stories, Immortal and Fear My Dear, that I did online and Activate and then got collected. The way that process was, I kind of laid it out first at each week that I drew it, like 8 to 10 panels.
Right.
Because I wanted to play with the idea of how in comics, image is text too.
Yep.
And so I would let that navigate the way the story would move and pace, right? And so then I was writing on top of it, meaning script came second.
Yeah.
Because if what I wasn't showing you, I had to tell you. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because that's the marriage.
It kind of filled in the blanks.
Fill in the blanks or tell you something that the visual's not telling you because
Right.
there's concurrent things happening or
Right.
whatever, right? So, and I realized that in that process, that was more true to comics than me writing first and then figuring it out, what to draw, with it kind of thing, which is what I'm doing right now. So what I'm doing as a veteran of writing comics now is what are the words doing that the visuals aren't, and vice versa. you know? So you have to think like that. And the same thing I think happens for other visual mediums, you know?
Yeah.
You're making movies with sound, you know, and moving pictures. You know, what do you not have to have the character say? Or, you know, or what is the sound going to do that the pictures aren't doing?
It makes me think of like movies or any piece of film that has extremely like little dialogue because they're showing so much in the image that not much actually needs to be said.
And it's engaging the viewer and or reader to sometimes even be a co-author.
Yeah.
Right.
Because of what you're throwing down, what are you picking up? How are you interpreting what's happening?
Right.
It confuses so many people, too.
It does, because they don't want to do the work. And the most passive thing is television and movies.
Yeah.
Because you sit there and
spoon feeds you.
It's told to you at a pace, whereas a comic book, you have to get to the next panel on your own.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? So you change the pace. And in fact, that was also interesting creating, because I drew the Red Hook for print first, then cut it up for the phone second, but that's the way you were going to see it first,
Right.
you know, but knowing that one day it would be the print version.
Wow.
You know, so but I had to think twice.
Yeah.
You know.
Wow.
It was it's and I'm doing it right now. I've been doing it for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So but then just the process, like the other thing is like, you know, what makes a good story, or you know, I think that, you know, someone once said there's only like 7 plots or something like that.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Basically.
Yep.
It's just the way you say it, the way you tell it. You know, why is it different? You know, because we all want basically a happy ending, you know, or you want it to have meaning, you know, and how do you lace it with current, you know, meaning, like modern terms, you know, and how do you make, I also think that part of the hardest thing to do is to make you fall in love with a character, a brand new character, especially not one with a history, but like, who's this person? Why do I care what their problem is? You know? And part of doing that is being vulnerable. And if you can show that you as the author are down to, like, you know, be a little vulnerable and spill little beans and maybe even be controversial. You know, it's not always about being likable.
Do you think that's because it's relatable? Because vulnerability is relatable? That's how you relate.
That's exactly how you relate.
That's how I feel about like that hopeless romantic idea, is because it's suffering. We can all relate to that.
But then there can be a kind of suffering where you want to beat the person up, bury them, you know, like shut the fuck up, you know, like stop whining, you know. Jonathan Ames is a buddy of mine who we did The Alcoholic graphic novel 10 years ago. In fact, it's being reprinted through Burger Books and Dark Horse Comics, coming out in the fall.
Excellent.
So and I did a new cover and there's some new material in it. But reading his essays, he's also where I got my Emmy for Bored to Death. He created Bored to Death and wrote that, and then Blunt Talk with Patrick Stewart. Great guy. But in reading his essays and his short story collections, which are amazing, his first one I think is called What's Not to Love, I realized that he could talk about other people or encounter people that might have been oddities or might, you know, be questionable, but he always made himself either the most vulnerable character in there, like, I'm going into this space to so that you could feel like you too were entering the space as a newbie. But at the end of the day, sometimes he was the loser. He was never like a hero in his own stories, not necessarily. And I thought that was an interesting thing that Jonathan presented as a character, you know, and probably even in his real life, that's who he is in a lot of ways. And I thought, okay, that's an interesting thing to think about. And then with working with Harvey Pekar, I realized. And Harvey Pekar, American Splendor, and basically wrote every moment of his life in comics. You know, every mundane moment, too. You know, But he lent an ear. He observed and listened to people. And I realized that's also important, is listen to people. You know, like, what are people saying? What's the controversy? What are they saying that's different from how you're thinking? You know? I remember as a kid, my parents would watch a show called Maude with B. Arthur. And then there was Archie Bunker, you know, All in the Family with Archie Bunker.
Jeff still watches that all the time.
Oh, shush.
And as a kid, I was like, it's not. Why would I like that?
Right.
You know, politics and, like, you know, racism, bigotry, and all kinds of stuff, and feminism, and, you know, I was like, it's not fun for me. I want Batman. You know,
you
like,
want Batman.
So, but as I got older, I was like, oh my God, these are incredible shows. You know, especially B. Arthur on Maude. You know, like, wow, a 47-year-old powerhouse. You know, and then Archie Bunker you're supposed to hate, but he's just lovable because if only he could just see it the other way just for a minute, like, and that was the whole point of these characters.
Right.
But now you try to do a show like that today, and there's outrage.
Never.
Yeah.
You can't have that. It's like, but you understand, they're there to teach you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there are people like that
Right.
more than ever
Right.
than I even knew.
Right.
I live in New York City. That's part of the problem is I live in a bubble.
Yeah.
I didn't know about America until recently.
Yeah.
America is a little scary.
Yeah.
A lot scary.
It is scary.
So
That's-
and you live up in the woods, so
Yeah. It's scary there, too.
It's scary there, too.
Scary everywhere. But okay, so you've been at this game now for the better part of 30 years.
Oh, and then hold that thought. There's something I want to say about the process in writing.
Yes.
I'm not a confident writer, but I realized because I drew a lot of other people's stories, and I realized as an artist drawing comics, I am writing.
Yeah.
Because the art is also writing.
Yeah.
It's a collaboration in writing. So then I thought, well, let me just try this on my own. So that's where I'm right now. That's the road I'm on right now. It's like,
Right.
this is the writing, so.
And that's kind of where I was getting at is like, you've done work for other people. You've played with in other people's sandboxes,
Yeah.
You've worked for the big guys. You've done your own stuff. Now you're writing and drawing, stories that are inherently yours and all this. What fuels you to keep doing that? What fuels you to keep, getting up and having that need to create?
Well, since I can't produce, direct, and write my version of The Last Jedi Star Wars movie. No, I'm kidding. I actually love that movie.
Yeah.
And
it was fun.
It's fun.
It was fun.
And when you came in,
yeah.
I really enjoyed it. It was a weird movie in certain spots, like why'd they go that way and that way. But in general, I just like I like the Luke Skywalker stuff.
Yeah.
I like the Kylo Ren stuff and Rey. So I think what I do is I'm just writing my versions of the characters I love, and I'm trying to go in that direction. And if I get the opportunity to actually write and draw franchise characters in canon terms, and I really love that stuff, I might as well play with those toys too.
Yeah.
I have in the past,
Yeah.
Little by small, here and there. I've never had my I don't have my Dark Knight,
Right.
and I'm hoping at least Red Hook will be my Sin City.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I think it definitely makes
And
sense.
and I thought Billy Dog would be that, and maybe he could be in the future, but I think Red Hook might be a little bit my Sin City.
Yeah.
And then maybe they'll let me do a Batman my way,
That'd be it.
But we'll see what
Excellent.
happens.
We'll see
And
what
I have
happens.
ideas. I have ideas.
Well, you just put it out in the universe.
I did. I just
so-
put it out in the universe.
Right.
Although, as much as I love Batman, I got to do Fantastic Four.
Definitely.
There it
I
is.
have to do
Definitely,
Fantastic
especially if it's
Four.
coming back.
What do you love so
Especially
much
for-
about Fantastic Four?
It's like the first comic that I think I glommed onto. I mean, I remember vividly as a kid Shazam, Captain Marvel. You know,
Yeah.
it was like, what's this about? And then Warcry kind of plays a little bit to my love of Shazam because in Shazam it's a little kid named Billy Batson,
Yep.
a cub reporter who comes across a situation. You have
Yep.
to read the comic. Where eventually you can just shout the word Shazam,
Shazam.
and become this immortal superhero,
Yeah.
right? And so in Warcry, there's this black teenage kid who befriends all the superheroes in America, and then there's an alien invasion, and they all basically get murdered
Yep.
except for him, and they've created this caveat that basically turns him into the greatest superhero of all. And what is the greatest superhero of all? A woman.
Yep.
A human of mass destruction.
Yep.
So, and he just shouts Warcry to become that, and then that turns out, spoiler alert, to be the dead girlfriend of the Red
Possum.
Hook,
Yeah.
the possum.
Yeah.
So you have to read the rest of that for where that goes, and then also other characters like Omak. She's
Yeah.
like, instead of one man Army Corps, she's one woman Army Corps.
Yeah.
So it's like if Shazam turned into Omak,
Yeah.
or Owak,
Yeah.
with little hints of Hawk and Dove. Because she's like this warrior, so she's
Yeah.
the hawk, and the kid is the dove, the peaceful side.
Yeah.
And then a sprinkle of firestorm,
No.
duality, two people sharing this form.
Yeah.
Little
So there's a lot going
yin
on.
and yang action.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
a lot of that going in there. And then it's all told through the straight white guy,
Yeah.
because that's what I can write.
Right,
What
right.
I'm allowed to write,
Right.
which is the Red Hook. And it's like, what is going on here? What just happened? And then there's this whole conflict that happens. You got to read it. It's a lot of fun.
I can't wait.
And then that ends on a kind of a cliffhanger that I'm
now.
Almost done writing tomorrow.
Yes.
So
that's so cool.
Yeah.
Excellent. So and bringing that back to the Fantastic Four.
Oh, right. Sorry. So real quick, it was about family.
Yeah.
It's about family, and I think that, like, my best friend Mike Houston, when I met him, he was holding a copy of Avengers #3 in his hand. We were standing on line at the schoolyard, and I'm Haspiel, he's Houston. It was alphabetical order.
Yeah.
And we're best friends to this day since we were 12.
Oh, that's cool.
And he had Avengers #3. I was like, "Oh, you like comics?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm 12 years old." He's like,
Right.
"I like comics too." And I was like, "You like Avengers, huh?" He's like, "Yeah, what do you like?" I like Fantastic Four. So we always had those, the duality of like those two different types of teams.
Yeah.
When you think about it,
Oh,
you
totally.
know? And I was like, well, why is he holding this expensive old comic in his hand? His birthday always landed on the first day of school, which sucked. So his mom would get him a special present. And in this case, it was an old Avengers comic,
that's
right?
so cute.
Yeah.
But the Avengers are really cool, especially like recently with Infinity War and all this
course.
going on. But those are like, these different types of heroes that had their solo comics, right?
Right.
Being brought together, right?
It's the Tolkien thing. It's the Fellowship of the Ring. It's the,
Totally.
It's
Totally.
let's get all of these people that shouldn't work together,
Right.
all together, and oh my God, they're saving the world.
Right.
Like that's
And
the
then
Avengers.
FF is like an experiment gone wrong, right? And they're basically family. And then actually Guardians of the Galaxy, those are actual true misfits
Yes.
of the universe,
Totally.
right? Or universes, whatever. Who in the first movie learned to become friends, in the second movie learned to become family.
Right.
So in a way, that's like Avengers becoming FF.
Right.
In a way,
Interesting.
So on that, then I gotta ask, why have we not been able to get a good Fantastic Four movie then?
It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense because it's on the page. It's been on the page since the 60s. There's so much stuff to take from. And like you just put it into perspective, at the end of the day, just write a family movie.
And I would hazard, and bear with me on this, I think part of the movie at least has to take place in the 60s.
Yes, I think so.
I think
Make it a period piece.
make it a period piece.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to throw a little idea out there. We've all seen Avengers Infinity War.
He hasn't yet.
You haven't?
But it's okay.
I feel like I'm holding out just to piss off Jeff.
Yeah, he's just, 'cause-
Well, you understand it has to do with this power of the gauntlet,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
yeah,
And
got it.
Thanos and all this stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a dramatic kind of cliffhanger ending that happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, we get to the next movie they're going to come out with. And I think part of how that's going to be resolved, and now that the businesses are all, we're hearing what's going on and everything.
Just today,
I
the
know.
Fox was bought.
I know. So I think what might happen is that, and especially because, again, contracts.
Yep.
So some of our older actors might be,
Yep.
see ya.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And how do you deal with that, right? How do you write that out, or how does it? So part of what I'm thinking is maybe Tony Stark, who plays Tony Stark?
Robert Downey Jr.
Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah.
Maybe and I think this also happened in the comic. He has to deal with the gauntlet. Like they get that, they retrieve it or
Yeah.
something, right?
Yeah.
And like, what do you do with it? What do you do? Because like Thanos is using it for a specific reason, right?
Right.
But what if you didn't do anything with it? What if you decide to disperse it back out, all those gemstones back out into the universe, right?
Yeah.
And it created this big. This is how I think it's going to end. It creates this big explosion, right?
Uh-huh.
And it just boom right across, the universe, but it's over Earth, right?
Yep.
So as it goes, whoosh, it creates cosmic rays.
Oh boy.
A little ship goes flying through the cosmic with 4 people.
Yep.
Right? That's
Yeah.
one thing. Okay?
Perfect.
Time out.
Perfect.
The fallout hits the Earth and it creates a mutant gene.
Yeah.
So
There you
get
go.
your X-Men. And
Yep.
I'm talking about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And the last shot is you see a fist, and a hand turn into a fist, and 3 claws come out.
Yeah.
Right? That's how you end that. That's how you end that like wave of
Right.
the cinematic. So then you relaunch, and what it might do is also mess with time. So the way I would bring the FF into the cinematic universe
Yep.
is the tagline is it's about time. Meaning
Nice.
finally we got FF coming, right?
Right.
But it's about time.
Time.
What is time about? Kang the Conqueror.
Right.
Isn't he a time
Totally.
guy? Right?
Totally.
So what happens is the FF did happen, but they happened in the 60s. So
Yep.
you have this thing,
Yep.
but they've been somehow locked in the negative zone
Yep.
to be brought back out into. So they're the new heroes are going to come in and launch the next wave, I think, of the cinematic universe.
I love it.
That's how I would do it.
Because
and then with that in
comics.
mind, maybe it's there's a story about time, so you can have the younger new actors they're going to embody these roles for the next 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
Come in.
Yeah.
You know, and then there'll be the passing of the torch of one actor to another. So you can have your Captain Americas and all these other characters, you know, with new actors.
Totally.
Right?
And, I mean, you know, you could even do it as an easier route, and you could have a period piece where you introduce the Fantastic Four in the 60s, and then, like you said, with a King the Conqueror or some sort of time travel kind of thing.
Oh, by the way, Galactus.
Galactus, yes.
Comes, right.
Something like that, where the end of the movie is in the vein of the end of Captain America: The First Avenger, where blip, now you're in real time. Now they've been transported into present day.
Right.
We just saw everything that happened in the 60s like it was yesterday, but it was yesterday for them.
Right.
You know, and it's like, oh no, what do we do with these characters now?
Yep.
And here they are.
There's so many ways to make that work, you know?
I hope somebody very, very important is listening.
I hope so too.
We just wrote a movie.
We did.
But I will say this.
Hashtag copyright.
What's his name? Kevin Feige?
Kevin Feige.
He's doing a great job.
He's doing a great job.
I don't even want to... Whatever he decides next, I trust this guy. I wish he would take over Marvel Comics. He's amazing.
Yeah, he's doing a great job.
So, yeah. But I'm looking forward to Dan Slott and what Sarah Pichelli, I think, is the artist.
Yep.
On the new FF.
Yes.
And I really liked what Chip Zdarsky and the artist did on Marvel 2-in-1.
Yep.
So I'm glad to see the characters. Those are my characters.
Yeah. Me too.
You know?
Me too. So. I'm very excited. I was interested as the reasons why they took Fantastic Four away from a comic standpoint. I understand it.
I don't get it. I don't like it.
I don't either. I don't like it.
And I don't think that actually works. Like
it didn't. In my mind, it didn't work.
What are you saving money on? What are you not making money? Like, I don't get it. It became a money thing.
But maybe the what's going to come out of it is, like you just said, Dan Slott just ended a seminal run on Spider-Man.
Yep.
And has proven to everybody that, you know, he needs to have his stories be told. So to have that power behind new stories with Fantastic Four, we might not have ever had that, and now we're getting that. So we might be getting this new age of Fantastic Four.
I hope so. I'm into
I'd be
it.
down. I'd love to see that done right.
In fact, one of the people I was hanging out with in Denver last weekend is Donnie Cates. Do you know that writer? He's done stuff for Image, and now he's the guy. He's wrote Thanos recently, and he's going to be doing Ghost Rider and whatnot. He told me a great idea for a Hulk story. That hopefully he'll rise in the ranks over at Marvel,
right? And
then be like, I want to do this, and then I was like, you got to throw my name in the hat.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah.
So it would be a lot of fun.
Oh, that'd be so.
I mean, there's so many ideas, you know.
Comics are the best.
But then when you can't really use them, and I've written a handful of ideas that had to be the franchise character, or it doesn't work.
Yeah.
But a lot of my ideas, i.e., the Red Hook, is a bunch of other ideas mashed up from what didn't sell or didn't get pitched or whatever, and turn into my own characters. I mean, you can see who half these characters are if you just like think for a second, you know, like. But then I'm making it mine, and that's what I'm always encouraging creators: is don't feel let down because you're not sanctioned or can't get hired, or then I'm looking at you at Marvel and DC. A lot of people are trying to get in the door there, you know. And if you don't, well, then do your own thing. Yeah. Yes, it can feel a little foolish to try to like compete, you know, with superhero comics with a new superhero comic.
Yep.
You know, but it's what I love, and hopefully because I have an indie slant, it'll be looked at that way. You know.
Yeah.
So, and so far anybody's read it seems to like it. So it's just getting it into their hands.
Yeah, and that's the whole name of the game. And for all of our viewers and listeners, I will put the links to Line Webtoon because you can get all of this on there right now.
And this is published by Image Comics.
And that's out now. Red Hook.
And go to your local comic shop first.
Definitely.
You know?
Definitely. So. And finally, for our listeners and viewers, what's the best way to stay up to date with you, with Dean?
Right. Luckily, there's only one Dean Haspiel on planet Earth, my name.
Love it.
So you can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram. I don't really tweet. But I'm on Twitter.
Yep.
Yeah. And then DeanHaspiel.com leads you right to my old live journal.
Oh, perfect.
That I still update.
Cool.
Perfect.
So,
and I'll put those all in this show, too.
Yeah.
I can't thank you enough for
being
being
you.
on
Thanks,
That's great.
guys.
That was fun.
That was a lot of fun.
Great.
Excellent.
Cheers.
Excellent.
This has been Fueled by Deathcast, a Death Wish Coffee Company podcast production. Thanks for listening.